Welcome, folks, and thanks for attending today. Today I'm going to talk about food waste reduction. In this first slide, what I'm trying to get your mind focused on is the fact that the food security, food waste, sustainability, pollution, those things are all cost factors, okay? And today we're going to talk a little bit about food security and sustainability, but focus on the food waste issues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it from two levels, okay? One, the supply chain level, and the second one is how do you control it, in-house with maybe small teams. Basically what we're after is being able to measure. So I'm going to give you some tools to do that. So here's what we're talking about. We got a lot of waste on the farm and obviously in restaurants, hotels, at home, etc. And so the major amounts of food going into the trash, and that's a significant problem. And as the population grows, that problem gets bigger and bigger, and it takes everything with it. So a little bit of an agenda. How do we measure this? I'm talking about some companies that are doing some pretty important and new things to reduce food waste. I'm going to talk a little bit about blockchain because that's a financial connection between suppliers and receivers. And if food waste, the costs associated with it are included in the contracts in blockchain, then it forces the supply chain to start getting control over things. Talk about donating, who's donating, what they're donating. I want to talk about this thing called cycle time using teams. Cycle time is an internal type of measurement and process control mechanism focused on inventory. We're going to talk about consumer sustainability concerns and the fact that consumers, when they see companies working on sustainability, they're actually willing to pay more for the product. I'll go into packaging and labeling, and then we'll talk mostly about how to set targets and get on with, improving things. All right, so some statistics. We're talking 3.3 gigatons of food wasted or lost on an annual basis. That's more than I can imagine. If food waste were a country, it would rank behind only the U.S. and China for greenhouse gas emissions. Give you some idea how big it really is. The production of wasted food also uses about 1.4 billion hectares of land, 28% of the world's agricultural area. So, I get a kick of the companies that are saying, in the food industry, the profit margins are so small. But I'm going to show you, if you're talking about this kind of thing, you're talking about huge amount of waste going on that needs to be controlled. And that includes groundwater as well. So here's some organizations that you can look up later. I just went through doing some research to find out who's focused on this issue. The top one, Food Waste Alliance, National Environmental Agency, WatchMyWaste.com in Australia, EC Europa in Europe. You can take a look at the list, greenandgrowing.org, liveloverraw.com, Statista, and freshkillspark.org. So there's quite a few of them out there. So we've got some different definitions, and this kind of is one of the problems we have. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, for instance, looks at the amount of food going into landfills from residences, commercial establishments, institutions, school cafeterias, industrial sources, factory lunchrooms. So they're focused only on the end of the supply chain, not on the supply chain, right? Kind of a narrow-minded perspective in terms of measurement and control. USDA takes it a little different. They talk about food loss and food waste. Food loss represents the amount of food post-harvest that is available for human consumption but is not consumed. Food waste is a component of food loss and occurs when an edible item goes unconsumed, as in food discarded by retailers due to color or appearance. Again, end of supply chain type of thinking. But you get over to the UN's Food and Ag Organization, and they say their definition is discarding of alternative non-food use of food that is safe and nutritious for human consumption along the entire food supply chain from primary production to the end household consumer level. I'm going to show you some statistics in a little bit that show, indicate some of the waste even on the farm levels. My own experience in Hawaii when I ran the division for the Department of Agriculture there is that up to 20%, as an example, tomatoes and papayas, of the food in the field is wasted for one reason or another, just not harvested. So the other two big factors here that are interrelated and related to food waste, sustainability. Obviously, if you're wasting food, you're jeopardizing sustainability, or trying to avoid the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance, and you're also creating food security problems because a lot of people may not be able to get the food they need. That's what that refers to. So the 1990 Farm Bill defines sustainability as an integrated system of plant animal production practices having a site-specific application that will, over the long run, satisfy human food and fiber needs, enhance environmental quality of natural resources, make the most efficient use of renewable resources and on-farm resources, and integrate, where appropriate, biological cycles and controls, sustain the economic viability of farm operations, and enhance the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole. So sustainability, from the 1990 Farm Bill, that's a pretty broad definition. I like that. So what's the impact of food waste? Well, this is USDA, and I just absolutely don't believe it. They say next decade, 2018 to 28, suggests that the share of the population that is food insecure will fall from 21.1% to 10.4%. The number of food insecure people will fall from 728 million to 446, and the intensity of food insecurity will decline by 34%. I mean, all you have to do is watch the news, to know that that's probably, way off the base, right? I mean, in California alone, there's almost 11,000 veterans that are homeless, so you know that they're impacted by food security issues. Climate change. Everybody talks about climate change. So what happens when climates change? Does it make food less safe? Well, if you look at, by the way, if you look at my slides, a lot of them have links at the bottom if you want to read these articles later. But this one has food contaminated with bacteria, viruses, parasites, toxins, chemicals causes more than 600 million people to fall ill and 420,000 to die worldwide every year, according to WHO, World Health Organization. So, when the climate changes, it warms up, as an example, bacteria grows, right? Viruses flourish, parasites, etc., are happy little critters. And because of that, we use more chemicals and, to kill them off, especially when it comes to crops. So here's some population statistics for you. If you look at this blue line, okay, I'm going to look at the blue line first, and you go back to about 1944 along the bottom there, you'll see that there maybe were 2 million people, a little more than 2 million people on Earth at that time. That's when I was born. Okay, now we go out to 2020, 7.4 million. So 3 times more people on Earth today than when I was born. And I can tell you I've observed it, okay? But at the same time, if you look at the red line now, you can see that there was a peak in about 1960 or 65 of the population growth, okay, at 2.1% a year, and that dropped, down to maybe at this point in time, I think about 1.2%, so quite a bit of drop. And the anticipated drop in population growth by 2100 is quite a bit. That doesn't mean there won't be more people, because if you look at that same number at the top of the blue line, it's 112.6 billion. I don't know how we're going to feed, or 11.2 billion, sorry. I don't know how we're going to feed that many people. Automated and artificial intelligence, maybe. Okay, so regardless of the food waste definition or loss estimates, whatever level exists means that water, manpower, energy, fertilizers, land, delivery, processing, packing, distribution, storage, handling, and every other aspect of the food supply chain are also wasted, and those are losses to your company's bottom line. Okay, so really, and I'm going to show you some ways to get at measuring some of these things within your own organization, okay, so that you can actually turn the waste into dollars. And that's what we're all about today. So let's start with the supply chain. We've got some things that we talk about in food and in industries, as well. And we spend time inspecting, and we look at yields and culls and recalls and rejects, and what do we do? How do we dispose things when they return, and how many customers do we lose? Okay, so all of these types of things can be measured as well. And so what I promote, I'm an quality control guy, right? And against all odds, believe me, because I've done it worldwide, my job has always been to eliminate inspection points, inspection and test points. And the reason for that is that those places in any kind of process are places where the inventory gets bottlenecked, number one, and the good and the bad get separated, and the bad gets thrown away, but a lot of times the bad doesn't get accounted for. And so coming out at the ship end, a lot of people say, oh yeah, we shipped X amount today, but they don't include all the stuff that they wasted, all right, at inspection, all the rejects and the culls, etc. And so a lot of companies like to say, oh, hey, look at it, we made our numbers, but they don't include the losses in their numbers. Kind of short-sighted, if you ask me. Okay, global food loss and waste by commodity, all right, so where does the waste go? If you look at the consumer level, you can see that we've got the blue numbers there at the top of the charts, indicate the percent of food loss and waste by commodity. So look at fruits and vegetables. That's one of the highest ones, between 37.5% and 45%. So 10% loss in fruit and vegetables. And then if you look at cereals at the consumption level, probably closer to 20%. So you can start looking at some of this data. Down at agriculture, fruits and vegetables, we're looking at 15%. That's an underestimate, I guarantee you. And then if you look at roots and tubers, again, 15%. So as you start breaking it down, you find out where your company is in this process. You can get an idea of the approximate amount compared to other companies and worldwide on the global food losses and food wasting. Like if you're in dairy industry, your overall loss is probably 17 to 18%, and you can look at each category. Look at food waste by producing sectors. Okay, this is all at the end of the supply chain, but you can see the throwaway at the hotel level, food retail, restaurants and bars, hospitals, education, et cetera, et cetera. So the big numbers are at the hotel, retail, restaurant, and bar levels. Again, you can find yourself in there. Okay, extent of food losses and waste, again. In agriculture, now they're talking from, this estimate is 15 to 20%. Post-harvest, we're talking another few percent to 10%. And processing, big losses in the processing arena. And at the consumer level, North and South America and Oceania is high. There's a couple surveys that companies have done, two European research centers in Italy and Germany. One in red, one in blue. And if you look at the right side of this graph, you see the numbers are all in the fruits, breads, vegetables, cheese, yogurts, milk, and eggs. Right, the big numbers getting lost, being wasted. And when you go to your own refrigerator, anytime you go in there, to clean it out, you're throwing away all this stuff, right? It's either moldy or whatever catches your eye. And this is what those same respondents, why they threw it out. Moldy was a good one. I just looked at some bread in my own refrigerator today. It was definitely moldy. Smelled, tasted bad. It was just thought it was in the fridge too long or out of date. It was leftovers. A lot of people don't eat leftovers, so they just chuck them. Looked bad. Wrong planning of meals. Kids didn't like it. Okay, so let's look at a supply chain. I'm just looking at some of those statistics just to give you a background on the extent of the problem, okay? But I'm going to look at the farm, distribution, processing, and retail and show you, an approach and the basic thought process behind all of this. Okay, now I've got a farm up here along this line. I've got distribution along this line, incoming processing on this line, and retail along this line. So let's start at a farm. I've got 100 pounds of tomatoes, and at the farm level, let's say they lose 30 pounds in the field and culling, okay, inspecting. So that's a 30-pound loss. So their new ship-out weight from that 100 pounds now is 70 pounds. And it's priced at $1 a pound. Let's say they're tomatoes. So for the new ship-out value, instead of being $100, it's now $70. So they lost $30 in yield, but they spent $2 an hour in inspection, or at $8 an hour, they spent $2 for inspection. Overhead charges $3.50 and transportation $10.50. So the total loss now is $46. Okay, so now I take that 70 pounds that came out of ship out at the farm, I bring it into distribution. I lose another 10%. That's 7 pounds. Ship out weight now 63 due to culling. Sales price jumped up because now we've added value from $1 to $1.50. New ship out value $9.50 or $95. New loss ship out $10.50. $2 for inspection, $3.50 for overhead, $9.45 for transportation. Now at that level, I got $25.10. Now you can see what I'm doing here. I'm taking that 63 pounds, bringing it into processing at a higher rate at $2.95 a pound, and I'm throwing 15% away. Now total losses for that is $40.59. Now I come into incoming retail. I'm taking that 53.55 pounds, bringing it in, another 15% loss. Good, that's probably an average estimate too. Looking at yield losses, ship out weight now at $3, $3.50 a pound. Okay, so look at my dollar figures. As I added value, the value went up, so the losses accumulated: $1, $1.50, $2.95, and $3.50. So now my ship out value is $159.31, and you can see my losses rolled up to $39.22. Let me continue this little scenario for a second. I don't want to go back over that. Those are just blow-ups. So if I go through all those operations and I add up my losses, okay, sales potential at 100 pounds at $3.95 or whatever it was, $895, but all my yield losses, inspection, overhead, and transportation added up to $150.90. That's 16.8% of 100 pounds sales. 16.8% lost food loss. At 1 million pounds a week, that's $1.5 million. So you can see how quickly it rolls up, but most people don't even measure it. Okay, now I'm going to take that same idea and I'm going to go through a couple of ways for you to apply that to your own process, okay? And what I've done is I've developed, and I'm going to use this a couple of times, a 5 step process. And I don't know what it is, but it has to do with maybe repacking or processing and repacking food. Okay, let's say there was 34 rejects at $1 a reject. At this step, that's $34 lost. Step 2, I had 11 rejects at $1.50. You notice my dollar value is going up because I'm adding labor and overhead. So the value is at each step. And no people don't look at this. This is a basic quality cost model. Step 3, 31 rejects at $2.20, etc. Step 4, step 5, 44 rejects at $3, and now a total loss for the week $250, $350. Total loss $12,700 about. So I'm leading you down a path, okay? And what you need to think about, who's in the people in this process can begin to measure these losses and can begin to look at new ways to solve, but you get down to the nitty-gritty level now. One way of doing this is cycle time, okay? And the reason I kind of focus on cycle time is real simple. Food is inventory, and inventory is money. Okay, so the question then becomes, what percent of inventory is wasted or shows up as loss or scrap? That's what most people don't measure. And you can calculate this. Your company can calculate these inventory terms, all right? And here's how they do it. They have an income statement. From the financial statements of a company have different parts, right? Income statement and the balance sheet. So from the income statement, take the number for the cost of goods sold and divide it by the average inventory number from the balance sheet. And you'll get a turns per year. Now, what's a turn per year? What turn per year is when you pay for something and you get paid back for it. There's all that lag time in between because you're sitting on it. It's not moving as fast as it could be. So here's an example. This is an average in the electronics industry. And Toyota building cars, so this 3.65 comes from like building components for a computer. But Toyota, a whole car with thousands of parts, they're doing 1 turn per month or 12 turns a year. So in other words, they're getting their inventory and they're getting their money back for it along with the increase in the value of the inventory. So if you're working in the food industry, it applies directly. And that should be tracked, you know, the total inventory, and each inventory item can be tracked, so you can look at the trends, so you can look at the you know, over time. And so management, now this begins to show you a bit of a management model where teams at the lower level can begin to collect this data and start presenting this information to management. The question is, the point is, inventory is money. When you look at incoming, WIP, and outgoing inventory, pretend you're standing in a bank vault looking at heaps of piles of money, because you are. And most people don't think that way, right? They just look at the inventory stacking up at incoming or stacking up at outgoing. You're sitting out there on the floor in a distribution center. You know, that's money. That is not just tomatoes and apples. So I like to say, I like to have teams. I like to throw teams in on problems like this because they are down in the trenches, right? The cycle time analysis is focused on 2 types of teams, what I call a corrective action team. In other words, these are management people, usually from different departments, who can work on problems that are stopping this little team in the function from getting it done. You know what I'm talking about here. Different departments have different priorities, etc., and so they create barriers to getting things done, and that's common in all businesses. But if you form this corrective action team and present these barrier problems to these members, their job is to start to get rid of those barriers. And this little team, this functional improvement team, these are the people that work together on a daily basis. They meet an hour a week on team meetings, and what their job is to improve that process, right? Whether it's cycle time or what it is. So what that implies is that if you've been on any kind of teamwork, you're going to have a shift in your thinking a little bit. And what that means is that the ownership for what goes on in terms of food waste in particular, what we're talking about today, gives the authority and the responsibility to the people in the process to make the changes, and that's done through the teams. If you can't give them, most people are going to say that's your job, it's your responsibility, but they're not going to give that team down there the authority that they need to make the process better, right? So if you're going to go to a team type of approach, you have to do that. And what I do is I give them a standard reporting format, right? So the team, then all the team member names are on the bottom here, and usually I put a team name up there, and I give them, they start to trend out the amount of food waste in their lines or wherever they are, and they set a target, an improvement target. And on this side, with a little bit of training, not available in this webinar, they can do an analysis of the different types of problems, that the reasons for food waste. And then down here, they're going to do a causal analysis. And in this little piece of the paper, this is 8.5 by 11 page, right? They're going to have the team members plan their activities to focus on food waste, and they're going to say who's going to do what and when, all right? And that's their plan. And each week they're going to run the plan, and they're going to replot their data, reanalyze different things, and then they're going to be able to take this single sheet and report it to management and show their improvement. We have a whole webinar on that, by the way. So what I do is I say, okay, you got first of all, and I've shown you a couple of these, a simple flow chart, okay? And the idea is that people in the process understand that the next group, they're working to serve a customer. And what they're going to do is list the steps in their process in the order in which they occur. And here's a simple diagram. Something's coming in, tomatoes are coming in, and then they're going to be moved from the distribution floor into the cooler, out of the cooler, and then they're coming over for inspection and repackaging, and then there's an output. And so this is one cycle. How long does it take from the time the tomatoes come in to the time they ship out to the customer? And so that's a cycle time. And so what we can do is we can measure the time in each step in the process. We're going to do that. And we're going to measure the time it takes for the product to sit waiting as well. Process time and wait time. And we just use a stopwatch, and we have a tracking sheet. And we use time in and time out. And there's a tracking sheet. Team name, measurement number, date, process name, name of the person with the stopwatch, how much process time, how much wait time. How much process time, how much wait time. Wait time is once like a tomatoes are delivered to the distribution center floor, how long, how many minutes, hours, whatever, are the tomatoes sitting there before they're moved into the cooler or whatever else happens, right? You've got to do your own process. And so you measure the process time and the wait time for each step. And then you add all those process times up, all the wait times up, and you can calculate, if you do multiple measures, multiple sheets like this, you can get the average process time and the average wait time. And your goal, of course, is to eliminate wait time and reduce your process time. So the question is, how long does it take to do a step in the process, and how long does the product wait for attention? It should be waiting not at all. It's not always capable in every process, by the way, but you're after the ideal cycle time. Okay, if you're going to make a bag of let's say carrots, and you start with carrots at incoming, and you go through 5 process steps, and it takes 2 days for that bag of carrots to get made. Well, first of all, you're impacting shelf life, but the question is, how long does it take for it to go through that process versus if you had no wait times, how long what's the ideal cycle time? And that's just a matter of adding up only the steps where something is actually done. So what the thinking is that inventory is a critical, right? Whether it's a product or paper, you can use this scenario for paper too. The goal is to reduce the wait time to 0. And you can plot, process times and wait times and get an average, right? You can plot them along a continuum. So this would be, maybe this would be incoming wait time and process time, wait time, process time. And you can, if you look at it this way, we've got 5 operations and we've got time going across the top. It's a 1-minute process time and 30-second wait time, minute and a half process time, no wait time. So that shows you line imbalance. There's an imbalance in there. 2 minutes and 30-second process time. Now a long wait time. That means inventory is piling up, and wait time here, 2 minutes and then 1 minute and 20 for this process. So total process time, the true process time that it takes for all this is 11 minutes. The wait time is 4 minutes. So the ideal process time is 7 minutes. So if you reduce that cycle, you're increasing the number of cycles per day or per year so that your company gets the money back faster, okay? And so food waste, the more time you have in inspection, I showed you early on that if you add a lot of inspection in here, what you're doing is you're increasing the cycle time, and you're losing inventory. And so you can do a Pareto analysis. So arrange the bars from the shortest times to the longest times to the shortest times. And then if you have a long wait times, and that's these bars here, that's what your team starts working on first. The team takes this as a priority and says, why do we have this line imbalance? Why do we have 45 minutes or hours of wait time? Let me talk about blockchain a little bit. Some of you know something about it and some of you don't. Let me go through it. Okay, the idea behind blockchain, you remember when you were a kid, you took your 2 index fingers and you held them up and you looked past them at the tree outside and you saw that little block in the middle there? Okay, that's what blockchain implies. On the left side is the supplier. In the middle is all the financial data, invoicing, et cetera, et cetera. And on the right is the receiver. And they're sharing all that data in the middle. Okay, and they have permission to look at the data. And it's difficult to forge, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so it's a shared ledger based on smart contracts. So I'm going to talk about smart contracts in a minute. So instead of having individual letters at the shipper and the receiver with all kinds of problems and tracking problems, blockchain creates a set of digitized smart contracts that must be fulfilled at each supply chain transition point. So in that little block in between your 2 fingers, there's going to be a lot of requirements, one of which is going to be data on food waste. And it's confidential, and you can work with your other supply chain members to use the same software. Let me put it that way so you don't have to recreate things. But now let's talk about this idea of smart contracts. I'm going to show it to you in detail in a minute. But the idea is that the supplier and the customer, receiver, are going to have agreements, okay? Not just in terms of money, but in payments and security. But they're also going to have agreements in terms of delivery, of food safety, food waste, sustainability, and like that. And all those things require that data is collected. And that data is available in that little block that I showed you between your 2 fingers, along with the financial data. And that means that your customer can look at that data. And here's what it looks like. Look at the bottom line. I've got a supply chain product flow from a producer, carrier, distributor, into a carrier, processor, distributor, carrier, and retail. That's a blockchain. And look at the number 2, blue in the middle. There's a shared ledger. So all the data is going into the little thing between your 2 fingers. And what kind of data goes into it? In addition to the financial data, look at the right there. Maybe we're measuring temperatures and pressures and humidity. That data goes in there. Maybe we've got traceability data. That data goes in there. Maybe it's temperature and sanitation controls, GPS date and time tracking. That data goes in there. Maybe on the right side, we've got all these food safety issues, the standards, supply chain controls. Maybe we're certified. Maybe we have sampling and inspection data. Maybe we're food defense certified. All that goes in there. And recall, any kind of recall that we've had, that goes in there. And then at the bottom, you can see our business drivers: pricing, delivery, quality, sustainability, and food waste, okay? So the smart contract, the concept is that both companies agree to these certain, not all of these, but certain smart contract concepts, and the data has to be available. So in order for the money to flow, okay? Now let's suppose there's sampling data. I'm going to go back to the right over here that shows failed water sampling on a farm level, but that farm shipped into the distributor anyway. That data then can be looked at in that little block in the middle between your fingers by the customer, okay? And the customer can say, no, you washed with dirty water, or you're growing with dirty water. I can't afford to have you do that. Or maybe that farm threw away all that food, so there's a big food waste. So that customer then knows that the prices went up because that farm is not managing itself well. But anyway, all that data from that blockchain goes off to the left into these dashboards and pictures so that everybody can see what's going on. Okay, so that's kind of how blockchain works in a nutshell. So what this suggests is making food waste a part of that overall smart contract requirements. Now let's take a minute. Let's look at packaging and labeling. And the reason we're going to look at packaging and labeling is that they're relatively big issues, okay, and they're expensive. And the laws say that food packages shall be in good condition to protect the integrity of the contents so that it's not exposed to adulteration or potential contaminants from the packaging or from external sources. And there's a little pile of what goes on daily. And so the feds, they depend on industry to do the testing of packaging and then submit scientific studies to them so that they can determine whether the packaging materials are generally regarded as safe or not. And what happens in packaging, and the reason it becomes a food waste issue, is that the chemicals in the packaging migrate from the packaging into the food. Because food, you got to remember, food's in contact with the surface of that packaging. So the feds, issue lists of generally regarded as safe packaging ingredients, right? But there's been some studies not that long ago that says the food industry, unbeknownst to them or maybe known by them, is using packaging that's been excluded from other industries like electronics. And the reason is that the chemicals migrate out of the packaging into the electronics components and cause solder joints to fail or components to fail. So your disk drive is working, your computer quits working. It's because of contaminant issues, right, from the packaging. But the point is that the food industry is still using a lot of those packaging products that are not being used in packaging for electronic components. Big mistake. Okay, so here's a good example of a problem area. And I testified quite a number of times in the Hawaii State Legislature. And what happens is, and most of you know about it, in the supermarket, when you go to buy meat, especially beef and chicken, pork, and lamb and like that, there's this modified atmosphere packaging, or MAP, is used to package the meat. And that means that carbon monoxide is injected once the meat is in the tray, the plastic tray, the styrofoam tray, and the plastic cover is put over. Carbon monoxide is injected into that package so that the meat is kept pink and fresh looking in spite of typical color changes due to aging. So if you take a steak and you don't wrap it properly, it's going to turn dark, right? Well, the markets don't want that to happen, so they use carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide in a package is generally regarded as safe. And what's interesting is that the data submitted by the FDA that got the MAP packaging approved was submitted by the manufacturers of the equipment, right? So it might be a little conflict of interest, but the FDA said it was okay. So what do I know? Anyway, there's a picture of what I'm talking about. Here's a machine. Preserves food color, not freshness. There's no label notification. Equipment approved by manufacturers, equipment manufacturers. So the question is there been studies of cross-impact information, the laminate and the tray? You know, there's laminate and the plastic on top of the tray, different chemicals, right? So what happens when they're together? Maybe carbon monoxide might seem safe, but what happens, you know, when what comes into contact with the tray, etc. And you know, you hear about these giant meat recalls all the time, and I mean millions of pounds. Okay, packaging and contact protection. Packaging controls to prevent food waste. You should be familiar with these. Temperature, you got to measure it. In the reefer, maybe use an RFID or wireless monitor. Humidity, sanitation. A lot of people forget this sanitation part when it comes to packaging. And what I mean by that is that your packaging suppliers have to be certified, and they should be certified to food safety standards as part of your preventive control plan, right? And if they're not, then they're bringing in dirty packaging that ends up maybe causing you to do a recall because the packaging is not clean. Maybe some of that gets in the food and people want to recall. Different kinds of packaging problems, packaging suppliers, sometimes the farms, the packers, distributors, manufacturing, filling operations, transportation, loading, unloading, just about everywhere. Okay, so things for you to think about packaging and content protection. You know, you can't have packaging that doesn't maintain shock, vibration, compression, and temperature controls, or barrier protection to keep water, vapor, dust, etc. out. And sometimes, you know, modified atmospheres, what I talked about a minute ago with MAP, clean, fresh, safer intended use, and promotes shelf life. And even at the pallet level, in terms of food waste nowadays, the pallets are supposed to be washable. Okay, so you know whether or not you're using cleanable pallets. That means they're going to be plastic or aluminum, right? And then labeling. If you go to the FDA or the USDA recall websites, most of the recalls are for bad labeling. Okay, and then what happens when there's a recall, right? Whether it's packaging or labeling, it all goes in the dump. All that food goes in the dump, and so that's why those are both important to get right. And so you know that there has to be general information labeling, especially allergen. Again, if you go look at the recall information, you're going to see allergen not noted on the label, right? Maybe there's peanut butter in something that doesn't tell that it's in there, or milk or something like that people are allergic to. It's not on the label. And that goes for the label and the formats of the labels and the graphics, etc. Serving size, and then claims. You know, when it comes to health claims and all that, that's a rubber band, right? Yeah. What I call the rubber ruler. So when it comes to packaging, the feds and you, regardless of feds or not, should go through what they call an expert compositional review. And so these people who are specialists in packaging can look at the potential for extraction and migration of the chemicals into the food, right? They can actually test it. And then also the contamination of food from packaged materials, from adhesives, inks, laminates, or other coatings, that these things become a food additive, right? And so you have to make sure it's food contact grade plastic. And so some packages, you know, my wife's gotten into this lately. For instance, you can buy frozen veggies now that you can put directly in the microwave. Personally, I think they're horrible. But what the question is, what happens to the package? Is there extraction and migration going on during microwaving, or when it just goes into a pot of hot water? So there's questions that have to be answered. That packaging comes into the food waste arena. And I've been around enough to go into many processors or distributors or even the farms and look at how they store their packaging. I don't care if it's a case for tomatoes or plastic trays for meat. You don't need me for you to go around your organization and look at how you store packaging, and it's a clean zone or not a clean zone, or whether the packaging is protected from contaminants throughout your whole process. So I look for contaminants, and if something you're not doing, you need to do it, because again, packaging is one of these that create recalls, and that's food waste. So there's some companies that have come up with some really interesting types of solutions, and their position is, let's for instance, Coffee Cherry Company converts coffee cherries into flour. Now, who ever heard of such a thing? Coffee cherries are just those husks on the outside of the coffee bean, right? But they're taking that instead of wasting it and making flour with it. The real deal uses cucumber infused water to make Bloody Mary mix. I haven't tried it myself. Regrain company name makes it into flour called Supergrain and incorporates it into snack bars. Planetariums takes processed sunflower seeds, makes them into chips. Salt and Straw uses bruised apples in ice cream. Why not? Why throw them away? So, part of the point here is in your company, if you're finding food waste, find a use for it, or create a use, create new products. Sir Kensington's replaces eggs with aquafaba from cooked chickpeas. I don't even know what that is. Bolivar turns fruit and vegetable scraps into products. Yes. Cromer turns imperfect vegetables into soup. Why not? Toastale uses spent brewing grain to make bread. Beer bread? Fopo rescues fruit and vegetables, freeze dries them, and makes a food powder. I almost said foot powder. Real Good Stuff turns extra juice pulp into fruit popsicles. Yep. Rise Products uses spent brewery grain to make a super flour. White Mustache makes wasted whey into probiotic tonic. I haven't heard of that one. Interesting. Treasure 8 dehydrates wasted fruits and makes chips. And Ruby's in the Roll makes condiments from surplus food. They didn't say what. So, food that's, quote unquote, heading for the dump, or it doesn't even have to be food. It has to be like here you're looking at bruised apples, aquafaba, cooked chickpeas, vegetable scraps, brewing grain. Who would have thought you could use brewing grain to make bread? Fantastic idea. From a sustainability point of view, and from a food security point of view as well. There's some data on Starbucks. Everybody knows Starbucks, right? This is one of those examples of people are willing to pay more. I mean, it's not just a coffee. Let's face it, you can make a good cup of coffee at home. Maybe you don't want to bother making your own latte in the morning, but world's first sustainable agricultural product. They use green cups and packaging. Green, they're trying to make their stores greener and power greener. 99% ethically sourced coffee. You can see their goals. 95% ethically sourced tea. 31 million trees distributed to farmers. 21.7 million invested in farmer loans. So they're doing everything they can sustainability-wise and food security, food safety, etc. with 10 million meals shared. And they have, if you look at their website, you can look at all the types of things they're doing. They lead a nationwide effort to donate food. Here we're talking donation. Their group is called Food Share, a program to donate ready-to-eat food meals to food banks from its 7,600 company-operated stores in the U.S. They worked with Food Donation Corporation in partnership with Feeding America. Okay, so since 2010, Starbucks stores have donated pastries to the support of Food Donation Connection. I don't know if you know it, but all that stuff behind the counter other than the coffee in Starbucks, it all comes to them from bakeries, right? And the bakeries freeze those buns and those granola bars and all that stuff, and then ship them to Starbucks warehouses. And if you've never been in a Starbucks warehouse, they're huge, right? And the freezer section is bigger than a couple houses, and you go in there, and here's all these frozen granola bars and whatever that they sell, and they take it out of there and they put it into a line, a distribution line, and they let this stuff defrost out on the factory floor or the warehouse floor. Actually, it's the warehouse floor, and then they fulfill orders for each store. So a store sends an order to the distribution center. Distribution center takes pallets of this frozen stuff out, and then they pick it out of the pallets and fulfill the order as it goes down this line. I don't know if you can envision that. And then that frozen stuff is defrosted because it's been sitting out now in the warehouse for X amount of hours, and then it goes on a truck and goes to the store. So that's how they do that. But a lot of it goes bad and doesn't sell. So they have donated pastries to the Food Donation Connection, and they worked with the FDC to develop a safe process to add perishable food to the pickup, which will be implemented in participating company-wide stores by this time next year. Starbucks is a big leader. Okay, so here I've gone through a couple of things. I talked to you about the supply chain and how it's important for the supply chain to work together, whether it's in blockchain or whatever, for each component, each group in that supply chain to begin to look at food waste. And internally, that can be done by teams, right? You can just do a straight up cost, what I call a quality cost model, from process to process to process step to process step to process step, and calculate the value added each time and the fallout at each step, and try to work that line so that if the time it takes and the fallout is all reduced. And so regardless of the food waste definition or loss estimates, whatever levels exist, means the common management goals for food supply companies must include food waste. This reduces food waste to a simple level where every company in food supply chain needs to make food waste a primary and permanent target for corporate control. So just the same way you talk about the budget or delivery times, et cetera, you now become food waste now becomes a measurement that's established and targets reduction of food waste that are set, and upper management needs to make food waste improvement reviews part of quarterly and annual operational reviews. So that's where it needs to go. It's a big problem. It's been a big problem for a long time, and it's costing, the numbers I put up, 10, 20% at the farm, and many other areas. So we're depending on where you are in the supply chain, what your products are, what the recall rates are, what the fallout rates are, et cetera. All that data is analyzable, but you just have to take a focus on food waste and approach it in a more mature manner. And so back to my original slide, waste, security, sustainability, and all these things are all cost factors, and you're paying for them. And I pay for them when I go to the store. And I don't like when my wife wastes money. So, all right, if you have any questions.